Hey there. I'm Ethan Blake, and if you're wondering why a man would laugh at his own proposal while a college kid cries at his feet, well, buckle up. My story doesn't start with a wedding, it starts with a refusal. The sea wind was surprisingly calm for a late May evening, but the atmosphere on the cruise ship was anything but serene. The luxury deck sparkled under the golden hue of string lights, champagne glasses clinked with forced elegance, and a small band played something jazzy to soften the extravagance. Rachel Lewis stood next to me, radiant in a tailored white dress that caught the breeze just enough to look ethereal, like she belonged in a painting. Her dark waves cascaded down her shoulders, and her lipstick matched the pale blush roses circling the massive engagement cake. All eyes were on us as we made our way toward the decorated arch surrounded by pink balloons and applause. And then, just as we were about to reach the podium, he dropped to his knees. Jason Miller, her charity case, her little brother, the frail college boy with tragic eyes and even more tragic timing, was kneeling in front of me like I held the key to his survival. His clothes were exactly as I remembered them from my last life: faded jeans that had been washed into near white patches, a cheap white t-shirt that hung off his bony frame, and those soft, messy bangs that framed a face too delicate for its own good. "Brother Ethan," he said, voice trembling, "my family's poor. My mom's still paralyzed, and I need help to keep studying. Please, after you marry Miss Lewis, can you not make things harder for me?" A collective hush fell over the crowd. Rachel's grip on my hand slackened immediately, her gaze flicking between me and him, already brimming with disbelief. "Ethan," she asked, her voice cool but accusing, "did you say something to him privately? He's just a student I sponsor. Why are you so jealous?" Ah, there it was. That perfect blend of self-righteous concern and subtle condemnation. The kind that used to make me question my sanity in our past life together. I looked at her, the corners of my mouth tugging upward, not in joy, but in recognition. I helped Jason to his feet slowly, dusting off his elbow like he was a child who'd scraped his knee. "Don't worry," I said, my voice calm, calculated, and loud enough for every guest to hear. "Miss Lewis will always be your Miss Lewis. I have no intention of marrying her." The gasps were audible. A spoon clanged against the side of a wineglass somewhere. The band fell silent. And Rachel's entire expression twisted into a mask of disbelief, then panic, then fury. She spun to face me, her tone icy. "What are you talking about? Are you out of your mind?" I was. Once. In another life. But not anymore. Not since I died before 30, rotting inside from depression, betrayal, and self-loathing while Jason played the martyr and Rachel played the fool, or perhaps, the orchestrator. I remembered every slight, every fever I suffered alone because she was with him, every late-night thesis revision she did for him while I sat in the dark waiting for someone who never came home. I remembered the time she abandoned our vacation because Jason needed a seaside trip to expand his horizons. I remembered how she jumped from our bed at 3 a.m., groggy but urgent, because Jason in another continent had a stomachache and couldn't even type to order his own medicine. I remembered being called selfish for asking why a grown man couldn't handle basic pain management without calling my girlfriend at dawn. But mostly, I remembered dying. Alone. Forgotten. Replaced. So yes, I knew what I was saying. I repeated, with a calmness that somehow made it worse, "I'm not marrying you. Not now. Not ever." Jason's performance faltered. His lower lip stopped trembling, his eyes no longer wet. He hadn't expected that. He thought I'd flinch, maybe mutter an apology, or worse attack him and confirm his victimhood. But I didn't. I simply walked away. Rachel caught up to me seconds later, heels clicking desperately against polished wood. "Ethan, wait. Listen, Jason doesn't know how to behave. He's just scared. He shouldn't have said those things here. Let me apologize on his behalf." Her tone shifted again, this time sugar-laced with guilt. "Please. Just hear me out." I didn't answer. I just stared at her. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the name lighting up the screen: Emily Carter. A name I hadn't seen in years. My childhood friend. The girl who'd vanished the moment Rachel and I became a thing. She was calling now, as if on cue. I picked up. "Hey," I said simply. "Thanks. I'll call you later." Rachel's pupils shrank. "Emily? You've been in touch with her?" I shrugged. "No. Not while I was with you. But now I'm single. Why shouldn't we talk?" Her mouth opened slightly, caught off guard. "Are you still jealous of Jason?" she demanded, lighting a cigarette from her clutch like it was a defense mechanism. "I've told you before what I feel for him is pity. Sympathy. That's all. He was just scared. He thinks you hate him." I stared at her. Not with anger. With disbelief. "You really think you're just doing charity, don't you? That this is all about helping someone in need?" I smiled, a sharp, bitter smile. "You're incredible at romanticizing self-deception, Rachel." She tried to argue. I raised my hand. "Let's talk properly," I said. "Day after tomorrow. 6 p.m. Michael's coffee shop." She stared at me, searching for a crack in my armor. There wasn't one. Not anymore. When I got home that night, my parents were waiting for me. The living room was aglow but heavy with silence. My mother sat with her hands clenched tightly in her lap, while my father's expression could have curdled milk. "You broke off an engagement in public," he began, slowly, dangerously. "Do you know how much damage that causes not just to her, but to us? To our families? To our reputation?" I didn't flinch. "Yes, I know. But I won't apologize." He sighed, leaning back with disappointment more than rage. "Even if you wanted to end things, you could have done it discreetly. Not like that." "Last time," I muttered, half to them and half to myself, "I tried being discreet. I tried being kind. I tried enduring. It got me nowhere but buried in scandal and self-hate." My mother softened slightly, perhaps sensing something had changed. My father looked tired. "We just want to know what your plan is. Because right now, this looks like a tantrum." "Then I'll make it look like a statement," I said. "I'll give everyone an answer they can't argue with." And I meant it. That night, the internet exploded. Videos of me smiling coldly while a poor college student sobbed circulated like wildfire. Hashtags bloomed: rich brat, public humiliation, cruel breakup. The clip was cut before my explanation. No one saw Jason's act. No one heard Rachel's accusations. They saw a wealthy man stepping on the neck of the weak. I scrolled through the comments with dead eyes. I screenshotted the worst of them and forwarded them to Rachel. "How do these words taste, Rachel? Sweet? Fitting?" 10 minutes passed. No reply. Of course. She probably thought I just wanted her to comfort me again, say sorry, make excuses, and move on. She still thought I was the same Ethan who forgave her every time. But this time, I wasn't looking for closure. I was digging the grave of my old self. The next morning, I had the housekeeper pack a box old letters, photos, memorabilia, even that rusted soda tab ring she gave me in high school. I sent it to the Lewis estate with a handwritten note, "Return to sender." That night, Rachel stood outside my gate in the rain. Screaming. Begging. "Ethan. I don't want these things back. Why are you doing this? Don't you remember what we promised?" I sipped wine under dim bedroom lights, her voice echoing faintly through the glass. "These are our memories," she had once said, while boxing up the broken swing we built in childhood. "When we're old, we'll pull them out and remember everything together." I remembered. Too well. That's why I was done. I wasn't old yet, but I was already tired of remembering alone. The rain had stopped by morning, but the streets still glistened like someone had polished them with grief. I stared out the tall windows of my apartment, coffee cooling untouched in my hand, watching gray clouds drift lazily over the city skyline like ghosts that hadn't found peace. The box I sent Rachel still hadn't been returned. She hadn't texted. Hadn't called. And I wasn't surprised. Not because she'd changed, but because I had. In my past life, silence from her would have wrecked me. Now it only confirmed what I already knew, that the love I once believed in had long since curdled into obligation. The silence was her way of avoiding guilt, of letting time do what she always hoped I would, forget. But I had no intention of forgetting. The world, however, hadn't forgotten me. Not for 1 second. By mid-morning, I'd received over 100 messages, some from distant acquaintances fishing for gossip, others from journalists pretending to care about the truth. And then there were the comments. Oh, the comments. Rich jerk humiliates poor kid. How heartless do you have to be to crush someone's dignity like that? So this is how the wealthy treat the people they supposedly help. I sat on the edge of my bed, scrolling through each word like they were confessions from strangers who had all decided who I was without ever meeting me. My name trended not because of who I am, but because it made for a good story. And stories need villains. I became theirs the moment I said, no. That was the part no one cared to question. They didn't want nuance, they wanted someone to blame. And I handed them the rope. So I made a choice. I picked the worst of the insults, ones that called me entitled, manipulative, cold-blooded, and sent them straight to Rachel. No caption. No commentary. Just screenshots. I wanted her to see what loyalty had earned me. And I wanted her to sit with it. She didn't reply. Not after 10 minutes. Not after an hour. But that night, something shifted. Around 10:30, I heard a noise at the front gate. A rhythmic knocking. Not aggressive, just persistent. I muted the TV and stepped toward the window, wine glass still in hand. There she was. Rachel Lewis, standing outside in heels far too delicate for the wet pavement, hair still immaculate, face carefully made up, but her posture, it was all wrong. It wasn't confidence or confrontation. It was desperation dressed in designer fabric. Ethan, she called out, voice shaking more than I expected. I don't want these things. Why did you send them back? She clutched the box like it was radioactive, her knuckles white where they gripped the cardboard. You said they were treasures. You said they mattered. I stayed silent. I didn't unlock the door. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching her plead with memories she thought still had power. She didn't understand. Those things weren't painful because I lost them. They were painful because I remembered how much they once meant when she still knew how to choose me. I let her yell. Let her break down. Let her voice echo off the metal gates until she got tired and the wind carried her words away. Eventually, she left. Or maybe she stood there until morning, I never checked. But the next day, something else arrived. A message. Not from Rachel. From Jason. The great actor himself. Hey, Mr. Blake. I just wanted to say I'm really sorry about the other day. I didn't mean to embarrass anyone. I just panicked. I didn't know what else to do. There was more. Paragraphs, in fact. Apologies. Clarifications. Passive attempts at sincerity. I respect you. I know how much Rachel loves you. I hope I didn't ruin anything beyond repair. I stared at the message for a long time. He'd gone full victim turn peacemaker. Textbook manipulation. But he wasn't even my real target anymore. I typed back 4 words, let's talk. Michael's Cafe. 6 p.m., I didn't tell him Rachel would be there. Why ruin the surprise? The day came colder than it should have for early summer. The cafe sat at the corner of a quiet plaza, brick-lined and ivy-kissed, with warm lighting that made strangers feel like friends. Michael, the owner and my former best friend, stood behind the counter pretending not to notice me. He didn't greet me. Didn't make eye contact. Just offered a stiff nod. I returned it without warmth. I chose the booth farthest from the door, where I could see everything but be seen by no one. Rachel arrived first. I barely recognized her. She looked faded. Like someone had taken the saturation out of her life. Her eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were now rimmed with exhaustion. Even her lipstick looked like an afterthought. "Ethan," she whispered, sliding into the seat across from me like she wasn't sure if she belonged there. "You didn't answer any of my calls." "I didn't need to." I pulled out a folder and dropped it on the table. Her eyes narrowed. "What's this?" "Proof," I said. "Of who you really loved." She hesitated, then opened it. Page by page, she flipped through the documents: wire transfers, photos, receipts, messages. A meticulous record of every act of kindness she'd ever offered Jason, stretching back years. "Where did you get this?" she asked, voice thin. "You don't need to know," I said. "You only need to read it." Her hands shook slightly. I watched her face as the reality set in that all her little secrets, all her generosity, had been noticed. Recorded. "Wade. You don't understand," she murmured. "Jason had no one." "I just wanted to help." "Don't," I cut in. "Don't insult both of us with that excuse again." Her lips parted, then closed. I continued. "You had a fear of heights, remember? You wouldn't even take a Ferris wheel ride with me in Europe. But you went rock climbing with him." She looked stunned. "How do you know that?" "He posted it. Once. In a story. You were in the background." I never forgot it. Silence fell between us. Heavy. Permanent. I leaned back, calm. "You spent more time comforting him than you did me. More energy protecting him than you ever used to fight for me. That's not pity, Rachel. That's love, misguided or not." Her face lost all color. Then she whispered, "Ethan, I'm sorry. I didn't see it then." "No," I said. "You saw it. You just didn't care." Before she could respond, the door creaked open. Jason entered. And for once, he looked genuinely nervous. "Good. You're early," I said. He blinked. "You both of you are here?" "Of course," I said, rising slightly to gesture at the seat beside Rachel. "Come. Sit. Let's all be honest for once." Rachel stood abruptly. "Jason, what are you doing here?" "Two came because Ethan said." He looked at me with unfiltered confusion. "You didn't say she'd be here. And you didn't say you'd ruin my life," I replied coolly. "But here we are." Rachel's voice cracked. "Ethan, stop it. Don't do this." "Do what?" I said. "Tell the truth. Open the curtains. Isn't that what you always said relationships were built on, transparency?" Her face fell. Jason looked like a kicked puppy. Michael appeared behind the counter, staring with barely hidden curiosity. I smiled. "Let's talk about what it means to be generous. Let's talk about what it means to be loyal." Then I leaned forward, lowering my voice so only they could hear. "Let's talk about how easy it is to pretend someone's your brother, when what you really want is something else entirely." Rachel gasped softly. Jason's eyes darted around the room like he wanted to vanish into the wallpaper. Michael coughed behind the counter. I didn't flinch. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about clarity. And for the first time in years, I had it. What came next, well, that would depend entirely on how much they were willing to admit. And how far I was willing to go. The silence after that confrontation wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating, like the kind of stillness right before a storm breaks a summer sky in two. Jason sat frozen beside Rachel, his face paling as he realized he wasn't the center of sympathy anymore. Rachel's eyes were bloodshot, but her tears weren't falling. It wasn't grief that held her hostage, it was humiliation. For years, she'd been the girl who made decisions with confident detachment, who floated above consequence because her kindness masked her betrayal. But now, stripped of her moral disguise and surrounded by the wreckage of her own choices, she looked almost human. I should have felt something. Regret, maybe. Or pity. But I felt hollow. Not because I didn't care but because caring too long had dried up every reservoir inside me. I leaned back in the leather booth, the sound of my jacket creaking against it somehow louder than the ambient music playing in the cafe. Michael Reed kept pretending to polish glasses behind the bar, but I could see him listening. Good. Let him hear everything. Let him remember who helped him when his business was just a dream scribbled on a napkin. Rachel finally spoke, her voice quiet, almost fragile. Ethan. How long have you known? I met her gaze with stillness. Long enough to stop waiting for you to wake up. She bit her lip, hard. I was wrong, she said, the words spilling like broken beads. Two made mistakes, but not for the reasons you think. Then explain, I said. Because I've listened to your excuses in another lifetime, and they all sound like chapters from a self-help book about denial. Jason looked like he wanted to disappear. Rachel, he said, tugging at her sleeve gently. We should go. This isn't helping anything. But she shook him off. No, she whispered. You should hear it too. Her eyes flicked toward me again, and for a moment, there was something real behind them. Do you know what it feels like to be needed, Ethan? Not admired. Not loved. Needed. I gave Jason money at first, sure. But it wasn't about charity. It was because he looked at me like I was his last lifeline. He made me feel like I could fix something in the world. I stayed silent, letting the guilt pool around her ankles. You didn't need me, she continued, trembling now. You were whole. You were powerful. You had everything. And too felt invisible sometimes. Like my choices didn't matter in your world. So I found someone whose world I could change. There it was. Not an apology. A confession. Honest, devastating, and utterly selfish. I tilted my head slightly. So you abandoned the man who stood beside you for someone who clung to your ankles. That's not fair, no, I cut her off. What's not fair is being expected to keep loving someone who only loved the way they looked in someone else's desperation. She flinched, as if my words had slapped her harder than my hands ever could. I turned to Jason, whose fingers were twitching against the edge of the table. You're not a victim, Jason. You played pathetic like a symphony. You knew exactly how to draw sympathy without ever asking for responsibility. And when she handed you pieces of her life, you took them without asking whose they were first. I didn't mean, he started. Intentions don't matter anymore, I said. Not when the outcome is always the same. The bell over the cafe door jingled, and in walked Emily Carter, carrying a paper folder under her arm, flanked by a man with a shoulder-mounted camera and headphones. Rachel turned, alarmed. What is this? I looked down at my watch. A truth session. Live. You're streaming this? Jason gasped. Without our permission. In a public place. With no faces named. Emily said coolly. Relax. It's an anonymous slice of life unless you two decide to name yourselves. Rachel's face went white, but she didn't speak. She just sat there, too stunned to react, while Emily set up her equipment discreetly. I stood up, gently straightening my sleeves. We're not here to destroy reputations. We're here to reveal them. For too long, I let myself drown in the idea that sacrifice would be seen. That patience would be rewarded. But the truth is, silence only makes room for replacement. Rachel looked up at me, eyes glossy, mascara beginning to smudge. You said you loved me once. I did, I said, my voice softening for the first time that day. I loved you more than anyone should ever love someone who doesn't look back. I turned to the camera and smiled a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Let this be a reminder that not every prince marries the girl he grew up with. Sometimes, he walks away so she can finally see what she destroyed. Jason stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "You're sick," he spat. "You planned this everything. The scene, the humiliation, the stream. You don't care about justice. You care about revenge." "No," I said, coolly brushing off my sleeves. "Justice would have been forgiving you. Revenge is letting the world see who you are." Rachel pushed back her chair, eyes blazing. "You think this makes you strong? Humiliating us publicly? You're no better than the people commenting online." I nodded slowly. "Maybe. But at least I'm not hiding behind pity and pretending it's love." Then I turned and walked out. The cold air outside slapped me awake in a way no confrontation ever could. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. Like I had emptied a backpack I didn't even know I'd been carrying. Emily followed me down the steps, her heels echoing against the wet pavement. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I looked up at the sky. The stars had finally come out. "Not yet," I said. "But I will be." Behind us, the cafe remained lit, two figures inside now reduced to silhouettes. A scene from a story that wasn't mine anymore. And in that space between what had been and what could be, I found the strangest thing of all: peace. The next morning, the internet exploded again, not with doctored clips this time, but with full streams, unedited, uncensored, and painfully real. The camera Emily set up had captured everything: the trembling guilt in Rachel's voice, Jason's attempts to play the misunderstood boy, and my own cold, surgical dismantling of both. And the world watched. They watched in silence, and then in chaos. Some people called me ruthless, but more called it long overdue. The narrative shifted, ever so slightly, from "spoiled rich kid ruins a proposal" to "man reclaims dignity after years of being used." I didn't even need to push it. The public had always been hungry for drama, but now they wanted justice served with a twist of redemption. I let them feast. That afternoon, I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline, the sun slicing gold through the blinds while 1,000 notifications pinged across my phone screen. I ignored most of them. All except one. Michael Reed. Of course. The man who owed me not only money but loyalty. He'd sent a single-line message: "We need to talk." I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and typed, "Come find me. I'm not hiding anymore." A few hours later, I was back at his cafe, not because I missed the place, but because debts should be collected where they were made. Michael approached me with a sheepish look, wiping non-existent dust off his apron. "Ethan," he started, trying for casual, "you've made quite a mess." "No," I said, swirling my espresso, "I've done some spring cleaning. And I'm just getting started." He sat across from me reluctantly, fingers fidgeting with a sugar packet. "About the money, I interrupted, pulling out my phone, "let's do some quick math." I brought up the calculator app and began tapping. 8 years ago, I gave you $500,000 to start this place. No promissory note. No equity demand. Just trust. We'll go with a very friendly 3.5% annual interest rate. Compounded over 8 years, and you now owe me $640,000. His face paled. "Ethan, come on, don't do this here." "Why not?" I said, gesturing around. "Everyone's already watching." And they were. Patrons had gone quiet, coffee halfway to lips, as they listened to the tension ripple like static through the air. "You want me to be the villain again?" I continued, my voice low but sharp. "You've had 8 years of revenue and 0 accountability. If this were reversed, would you have let me slide?" He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "I'll transfer it. Now." His hand trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone. After a moment, my screen lit up with the confirmation. I leaned back with a slow, satisfied breath. Good. Now we're square. But I wasn't done. I leaned in and lowered my voice so only he could hear. Don't think I don't know you gave Jason my contact info. That you whispered in his ear about my weak spots. That you positioned yourself as the middleman, pretending to soothe me while fanning the flames. That's not fair, life's not fair, I said, standing up. But I'm done playing the fool who forgives everyone. Just as I turned to leave, Rachel walked in. Not alone, Jason was with her, limping slightly, his expression a mixture of confusion and dread. Her face looked carved from glass, sharp and fragile at the same time. "Ethan," she said, voice echoing across the marble floor, "we need to talk. Not like last time. Not in front of cameras or strangers. Just you and me." "Then leave him," I said, nodding at Jason. "You want honesty? Don't drag in your shadow." Jason winced but stayed quiet. Rachel hesitated, then did something I didn't expect. She stepped in front of Jason, blocking him from view, and knelt. Right there, in the middle of the cafe, her designer coat pooling on the ground like fallen royalty. Gasps. Stares. Phones rising to record. "I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice cracking. "I'll cut him off. I'll send him away. Just don't leave me behind." I didn't move. Didn't breathe. My pulse ticked like a slow drum in my ears. This was what it felt like to hold power without needing to raise your voice. But before I could respond, I saw something. A shadow near the corridor. Jason, trying to slip away. Not out of embarrassment. Out of fear. But not for himself, for her. He knew she meant what she said. That she was ready to throw him aside if I only lifted a finger. And that, strangely, made me smile. "Classmate Jason," I called out, watching his body freeze mid-step. "Leaving so soon?" Rachel gasped and spun around. "Jason? Why are you?" He collapsed into her arms without a word, trembling like a child caught stealing. I turned to the crowd. "Everyone here, take note. When a man kneels for a woman, it's called love. But when she kneels for the same man she once overlooked, it's too late." The cafe erupted in murmurs. Rachel helped Jason to a sofa and turned back to me, her eyes hollow. "Ethan. Please. You never knelt when I cried alone in our bedroom. Never stayed when I begged you to stop running to his side. But now, when you feel him slipping suddenly, I'm worth fighting for." "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "Then what was it like?" My voice rose just slightly. "Because I remember every fever you left me alone with. Every lie you coded in altruism. Every time you said, 'He's just like a little brother,' while cuddling him like he was made of glass." She said nothing. Just crumpled into her own silence. Then, as if on cue, Emily emerged from the staircase again. This time not with a camera, but with a folder. "You ready for the next chapter?" she asked. "I think the audience is." I nodded, stepped forward, and turned toward the cafe with a smile that was more blade than bomb. "Let's give them what they came for." The following days blurred into a quiet storm, the kind you only notice once it's already rearranged your world, not with thunder but with decisions made in silence. I didn't need to argue anymore. The evidence had spoken, and the public listened. The cafe confrontation streamed, dissected, quoted, had reshaped every conversation involving the Lewis family name. But while Rachel retreated from the noise, I leaned into it. I wasn't done, not yet. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about pruning a rotting legacy from a tree I once called home. When I stepped into the Lewis estate with a box of antique calligraphy and paintings purchased with money Rachel once gave me as gifts, her parents welcomed me not with anger, but with quiet remorse. Their housekeeper led me past polished marble halls into a solemn study lined with books no one read anymore, where Mr. and Mrs. Lewis waited with forced smiles and reddened eyes. "These," I said, placing the box gently on the coffee table, "were once mine. They belonged to her. But I believe they were never meant to stay with me. I'm simply returning them to their rightful place." Her father didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at the art pieces with a sort of weary reverence, like each brushstroke reminded him of a daughter who had somehow drifted out of orbit. "Ethan," he said at last, voice husky, "we owe you more than apologies. We owe you clarity." I offered a tight nod, watching as her mother reached for a scroll, her hands trembling. "We believed you two would last," she whispered. "That the two families would remain bound, not just by business, but by something more sacred." "So did I," I said. "But love without loyalty is just theater. And I'm done acting." The air between us turned brittle. Her father cleared his throat, exchanging a glance with his wife before leaning forward. "Ethan, we've drawn up an agreement. If Rachel contacts that man again," his lips curled at the reference to Jason without speaking his name, "then every share she holds in our family's assets will be dissolved. Permanently." I didn't speak. I simply poured tea into their cups, offering it with both hands as tradition demanded. "When feelings are involved," I said quietly, "the heart loses direction. But I've found mine again." They stared at me with something that looked like guilt or perhaps relief. Later that evening, word spread that Rachel had been sent to Europe to expand international partnerships, though anyone with half a brain knew it was exile dressed as duty. Her credit cards were frozen. Her personal lines severed. Even Emily told me she'd received an official memo warning the firm not to provide Rachel any legal support or personal loans. Jason, on the other hand, vanished from public view altogether, which only made the whispers grow louder. Is he her lover? Was she funding his education the whole time? How deep does it go? I didn't feed the flames. I simply let them burn. That night, Emily invited me to her office under the guise of discussing legal filings, but her voice betrayed a softness I hadn't heard since high school. She poured whiskey into 2 crystal glasses and handed one to me without comment, letting the silence sit comfortably between us. "You planned this from the start," she finally said, not accusingly, just with quiet awe. "You didn't just want them apart. You wanted them to never find their way back." I didn't deny it. I only swirled the amber liquid in my glass and murmured, "Some people need to lose everything to realize what they ruined." She studied me, head tilted slightly. "You really think they'll stay separated?" I leaned back in the leather chair, eyes fixed on the city lights bleeding into one another outside her window. What they had was built in shadow. Now that it's exposed, it'll rot in daylight. A few days later, as I stepped out of a meeting near the Villa District, I saw her. Not Rachel, Emily, waiting beneath a cluster of low-hanging jacaranda trees, her heels tapping nervously against the pavement. "You're late," she said with a half-smile. I waited. I smiled back, slower, more deliberate. "I didn't think you would." "I didn't think you'd come either," she said, then handed me her phone. "You should see this." On screen was an email from the Lewis legal team confirming Rachel's indefinite reassignment to a European holding company. No timeline. No guarantees. Just a clean removal. Emily looked at me with something unreadable in her eyes. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" "Maybe," I said, returning her phone. "Maybe not. But by the time she does, Jason will either be married to someone else or broken beyond repair." She exhaled slowly, staring off into the fading orange of the sunset. "That's brutal." "It's mercy," I replied. "They won't survive each other. They never could." The final nail came weeks later. A leak. Some anonymous post claiming Jason's tuition had been covered not just by Rachel, but funneled through shell accounts tied to Lewis subsidiaries. The accusations weren't proven, but the damage was immediate. Jason was branded online as a parasite, a glorified pet with a scholarship. Memes exploded. Sympathy curdled into mockery. Meanwhile, I flourished. Business surged. Investment stabilized. My name, once scandal-ridden, became synonymous with resilience. And through it all, I never once responded to a single message from Rachel. Not even when she called from a Belgian number. Not when she texted that she missed our attic, the place we once stored every relic of childhood. I ignored them all. Because nostalgia is a liar, it only shows you the warmth, not the wounds. One night, Emily and I sat quietly in the same attic Rachel once called our time capsule. Dust floated lazily in shafts of lamplight. The broken swing pieces we'd collected as kids were still there, stacked in the corner like half-built memories. She kept it all, Emily said, touching the wooden beam. Even after everything. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The past had become an exhibit. I was simply visiting. Do you regret anything? She asked after a while. Only that I waited so long to walk away, I said. The rest was necessary. She turned to me, her eyes soft but steady. And what now? I smiled, the kind that didn't hurt anymore. Now I rebuild. Without ghosts. In the hush that followed, she leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't ache. It healed. The first time I felt like breathing again was on a Wednesday, just after midnight, when the city had finally gone quiet and the wind stopped trying to remind me of her. I was in the garden behind my apartment, barefoot on dew-soaked grass, staring up at the sky like it might hold a version of myself I hadn't yet met. For weeks, I had walked through the wreckage of old promises silently, deliberately never slowing down, never once allowing myself the indulgence of looking back. But now, in the hush of an unremarkable night, I felt something shift. Not regret. Not longing. Just the strange, unfamiliar weightlessness of no longer carrying someone else's story in my chest. I didn't even realize Emily had come over until her shadow joined mine on the lawn. You're barefoot, she said softly, holding 2 mugs of tea. So either you've reached full poetic crisis or you're actually healing. I smirked, taking a mug without a word. The tea was hot, fragrant with something citrusy. We stood there a while, not touching, not speaking, until she broke the silence again. Do you think she hates you now? Maybe, I said. Or maybe she's still waiting for me to write some heartfelt apology so she can feel like the wounded one again. Emily's laugh was low and sharp. She always did have a flair for moral theater. She'll perform for herself now, I muttered. No audience left to clap. I sipped the tea slowly, letting the warmth bloom down my throat. What about him? She asked. Jason? I shrugged. Last I heard, he dropped out. Rumors said he was working in a bookstore somewhere in Montreal. But that might just be wishful thinking on someone's part. Doesn't matter anymore. You don't want to know. Knowing changes nothing, I said. I've seen who he is when no one's looking. That's all I need. A gust of wind swept past us, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the neighbor's fence. I remembered planting jasmine once with Rachel, years ago, when we thought growing something together meant permanence. But permanence was a lie. Roots don't hold when the soil's been poisoned. Emily's voice pulled me back. I talked to your mother, she said casually. She asked if we were well seeing each other. I raised an eyebrow. And what did you say? I said we were growing into something that didn't need labels yet. That sounds exactly like you. And you didn't disagree, she said with a sly glance. I didn't. Because she was right. Whatever we were building didn't need the scaffolding of definition. It just needed space. Honesty. And silence that didn't sting. Days passed. The Lewis family's name stabilized in the business world, but the public had long memories and sharper eyes. Rachel's return to the country remained speculative, whispered through boardrooms and brand partnerships, but I knew better. When you exile someone for their own good, they either learn to stand on their own or vanish trying. I had no interest in checking which she became. Closure wasn't something I needed from her. Anna Marie, it wasn't hers to give. Instead, I poured my energy into the Blake Foundation, expanding our mentorship programs for students from underprivileged communities. Real students. Kids who didn't wear pity like armor or manipulate guilt into currency. I went to the office earlier, stayed later, found satisfaction in structure, in decisions that yielded impact without the mess of emotional collateral. Emily helped unofficially at first, then more formally as she began advising on legal compliance. Working with her was seamless, a rhythm I hadn't realized I missed until it returned. One night, as we walked out of a gala event together, I noticed how easily her hand brushed mine. Not like she needed to hold it. Just like she knew it was there. It felt right. Simple. That was the difference. Loving Rachel had been a battlefield disguised as a ballroom. Loving Emilie, that's what this was becoming, felt like a quiet conversation that never needed to end. A few weeks later, a letter arrived at my office. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Rachel's. Inside was a single photograph, the attic swing we'd built, now restored and suspended from a beam, sunlight spilling through the glass behind it. And beneath it, her handwriting neat, restrained. I kept one promise. Hope you're well. I stared at it for a while, not sad, not bitter. Just reflective. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. That's where it belonged, not erased, but shelved. A memory that had learned its place. Summer waned. The days lengthened, shadows shifting across familiar streets like old friends passing through. On one such evening, Emily and I drove out to the coast without a destination in mind. Windows down, music low, her hair whipping in the wind as she leaned back in the passenger seat, eyes closed. You know, she murmured, you've changed. Everyone says that, I replied. I mean it, she said, turning toward me. You're not colder. You're just lighter. Like the war is over. Maybe it is, I said, watching the horizon blur into copper and gold. Maybe I won. And what did victory cost? I thought about it. All of it. The sleepless nights. The hurt. The detachment. The silence I once mistook for strength. Then I glanced at her, and the answer came easily. Less than losing myself would've. She reached over, lacing her fingers through mine with a warmth that required no permission. And just like that, without ceremony or grand declarations, I realized I had finally stepped out of the wreckage and built something honest from what was left. I was no longer Rachel Lewis's ex-fiancée, or Jason Miller's casualty, or even the prodigal heir who made headlines for walking away. I was just Ethan Blake. A man who had once been broken and chose, piece by piece, not to stay that way.